Hey, I'm Scott Kennedy, and we are here talking NFL draft. I'm in Atlanta, and I talk with my friends and colleagues from all over the country. And today I'm going to bring in a good friend of mine, Sam Webb, the Michigan insider. I've worked with Sam for the better part of 2 decades, and there is no one that has been tied into the Michigan program better or longer than Sam. And we're going to talk some NFL draft. We're going to talk some of the big name prospects, maybe a sleeper or two, maybe some underachievers, maybe some overachievers. And then before we get done, if you're watching this later, I want to talk a little bit about Jim Harbaugh and the 2021 season outlook. How hot is his seat? What's the outlook? Is he going to be there in 2022? We'll see. But first, I want to welcome in Sam. And Sam is up in Michigan, and I appreciate him joining me today and tonight. As always, it's a pleasure to see you. Great to see you, Sam. Thanks for being here today.
Great to see you too, Scott, man. Glad to be here. Like you said, it close to 2 decades. Making me feel old, man, but we're just seasoned. Let's put it down.
I know. I said that last time with Mark. I'm like, that just means we're wise. We're wise. But you know what? We still look as good as we did in 2002. So, or at least we haven't looked any worse.
Right. There you go.
So, but I appreciate you coming on. Michigan's got some really good, and I've got you founded down here. As you can find Sam at SamWebb77 on Twitter, and you can find all of his work at themichiganinsider.com. Again, Sam has been a terrific person in this business and has built a huge business for himself and his colleagues up with the Michigan Wolverines. So there is no one better, and I'm lucky to have him on today. So want to talk some of the big name guys and some of the guys who might slide down a little bit and NFL draft. And the first guy I want to talk about, obviously, when we're talking big name guys, is Kwity Paye. Now, I look at, and again, I'm going to date myself on this one. Anybody under 25 will probably say who. But when I saw the numbers, the first 2 guys that came to mind for me were Dwight Freeney, a 6'1", 260-pound defensive end from Syracuse, and probably, if he's not already in the Hall of Fame, probably should be with the Colts. And actually, the first guy that came to mind who slid down a little bit because he didn't have quite the 40 was Elvis Dumervil, who played at Louisville and was a 4th-round pick. Now, Kwity Paye is higher than that, had a good time at Pro Day. Is he a little bit of a tweener? Does he come in? Could he fit in that outside linebacker 3-4? Because he didn't run his shuttle or his L-cone, and I haven't seen him play as much as you have. That's why you're here. Give us a quick scouting report on Kwity.
Yeah, he absolutely could do that. I mean, first of all, let's rewind the tape a little bit. Back to Kwity coming out of high school, right?
Okay.
So Kwity was an Under Armour All-American, but he was not selected by the selection committee. He was voted in by the fans. He was voted in by Michigan. You know how huge.
Well, Michigan. I try to tell Michigan, Ohio State, and then there's a drop off to the 3rd biggest fan base. It's just the way it is, folks.
Right. So he was there because he was a Michigan recruit, but you could tell when he got there that athletically he sort of fit in, but he was a little green. He was still sort of a baby in the game, not a baby body, but a baby in the game, and certainly a baby as a defensive end. Kwity was at that point a 6'2", maybe 215, 220-pound defensive end. A guy who, as a high schooler, ran an 11-second flat 100-meter. So you knew he had athleticism, but this was a projection. This is one of those guys that if Don Brown, the defensive coordinator at the time, looking for those diamonds in the rough up there in the Northeast, this was one of them. And so we were thinking that it was going to take him some time to really get to the point physically where he could get on the field and contribute. Didn't take long at all. He was ready to go as a true freshman over some of the All-Americans that he came in onto campus with. So that told you that he had good football IQ, was able to put on some weight relatively quickly. So in that time, we saw him line up at defensive end. We saw him kick inside and pass rushing downs, bring him on some stunts, get him at that 3-tech and have him wreak some havoc with his quickness. I say that to say that he's a guy that physically can play on the line of scrimmage, but is fast enough and changes directions well enough to be able to stand up in certain situations, drop in some coverage, do some zone blitz stuff. So he is a tweener in the classic sense, but just because he's done so much, but I think physically he's more than that. I mean, as much as we look at a guy like Doomerville, as much as we look at a guy like Dwight Freeney, Kwity brings more size to the equation that will allow you to do some things up and down the line of scrimmage with him. The bigger question mark, Scott, is production. He didn't have the numbers that would say top 10, top 15 pick. So this is a general manager looking at him and saying, well, why? Why didn't he have that production?
Okay,
the things that I just talked about, Scott. They're moving him up and down. Some of the things they had him do, he's occupying blockers so the blitzes can get home. Those things contributed to maybe the numbers being depressed a bit.
Well, when you're describing him coming out of high school, the type of player that sprung to mind was TCU. Remember how the article about them, I believe in Sports Illustrated, they talk about recruiting. All they do is recruit running backs. Recruit guys that were running backs and then turn athletes and let them grow into it. I'll tell you, when I was watching him pass rush, another guy of that ilk that jumped right into mine was David Pollock. And people don't realize how good and athletic David Pollock was. He was a 3-time All-American for a reason and drafted in the first round as an outside linebacker after being a freshman All-American as a defensive tackle. That's a freak of an athlete. But I saw Kwity using his hands so well, and Pollock was as good as anybody I'd ever seen do that. Now, as part of that production, you mentioned how they moved him around a little bit. So let's ignore the production for a second. And how was his arc? How did he improve from beginning to end? What was his talent like from, maybe not necessarily from a production, but how did you see him progress through the years?
So this is where a general manager is going to make his money, right? Because you got to look at all the factors. He progressed really well. I mean, just from high school to freshman, he progressed more than a lot of guys you'll see coming in. Remember, I said he's a guy new to the game, really didn't really see himself as a college level, certainly a Michigan level football player until deep into his senior campaign. So his development from high school to college was huge. And then, so he's on the field right away. Over the next couple of years, he becomes a player that is a fixture, a go-to guy, a guy or a dude. I can't remember what Don Brown, how you used to call him, but he was one of his main guys. But production. So 2 factors, moving him around. And then the other factor is, as you got deeper in Don Brown's tenure, the talent around him defensively, around Kwity defensively, wasn't what it was when, say, Rashawn Gary was there and Chase Winovich was, a prime guy. And so in his junior campaign, where he put up his numbers, there were some games in there where you looked at it and you said, okay, he didn't put up big numbers against Wisconsin. He didn't put up big numbers against Ohio State. He didn't put up big numbers against Alabama. And you will look at that and say, okay, well, in the bigger games, he didn't have the big production. We saw him in the offseason put in a lot of work. His body was even more finely tuned. He was quicker. He was faster. He seemed like he was ready to really bust out in his final year, but then COVID hit and he got injured. And so he wasn't on the field enough to really quantify that improvement. So you're going to have a scout is going to have to look at it. The general manager is going to have to look at it and say, all right, we see how he's improved in years past. We see some of the games in this junior campaign where maybe he fell short, mainly in the run game. Do we feel like he grew enough physically and worked on his game enough, his craft enough, that if he had played, he would have put up big time numbers and can do so in the NFL? I think the answer to that question is yes, just knowing him. Question will be how many general managers feel the same way.
Well, and that will be interesting because it's not a great year for defensive linemen in this draft. It is a very good draft, but it is not a great year for defensive linemen. And Kwity's got a chance to be the first defensive lineman taken, maybe even the first defensive player taken, depending on how well someone evaluates that. Now, after what Micah Parsons did at Penn State last week, he'd be my first player off the board, but it's there's a long way to go. So let's move on a little bit. There's another player I want to talk about that didn't necessarily have such a great pro day, but does it matter? Did he have a good enough career to justify being a first round despite so numbers at his pro day when everybody else is doing these eye-popping numbers at their pro days? And that's Jalen Mayfield, the offensive tackle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I think so. I think that you're talking about a guy, if you go back and watch him in his junior campaign and see him, what he going against Chase Young. I mean, I think that's where he made his money, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I don't get too caught up. People forget about the body of work. They forget about what happens on the football field, and they fall in love with these, the underwear Olympics, so to speak.
Yeah.
But there's something to be said for, how that matters, and when you're talking about different levels of competition, and is he athletic enough to do this? Maybe we want him to do that, but tell me about Jalen's game and why, as a 4.9 shuttle that doesn't show a lot of lateral movement. Tell me why he has shown that where it matters, which is with the pads on and a defensive end in your face.
Yeah, so physicality, number one. I mean, I like to say Jalen was a guy that they had to tame a bit because watching him in high school, you know how they say play till the whistle? He played until the whistle stopped. Like
the old Bobby Bowden line. We played to the echo of the whistle.
Right, exactly. He was that guy. So you had to rein that in. I like that mentality in the trenches, especially. That's number one. You knew he was going to be a guy in the run game that you could feel that you could really have him anchor in the run game and run behind him. I think we saw some of that. Pass pro is where you really wanted to see his maturation. And a guy that I think it's going to be interesting to see with the Chicago Bears, how high he is, how high Jalen is on the Chicago Bears board. Because a guy who I know if you talk to Jalen, he will credit with just, as far as his technique and his craft and giving him tips on what he needed to do to improve. Juan Castillo, the offensive line coach for the Chicago Bears, was an analyst at Michigan. And I know that was a guy who Jalen throughout his offseason and even in season when he was playing a bit, that was a guy who he would continue to talk to, continue to get tips from, and a guy who I think loves Jalen Mayfield. So he is an upside pick. I think his pass pro had gotten a lot better in that game against Ohio State and Chase Young, and how he performed in that game was his bellwether game to me. I think that he's a guy late in the first round. You stick him at right tackle, you're going to be able to run the football behind him. If you had some questions about it, you can help a tackle, right?
Right.
You can help a right tackle, especially. I mean, line up a tight end on the side and help him out. Question to me is, does he get proficient enough to maybe even flip to the other side? There was some question if he could be a left tackle, and thinking that he could possibly do that. That tells me, and that's talking to offensive line coaches. So that tells me there's a lot of confidence that at the very least, as a right tackle and pass pro with some more development, that he's going to be a guy that you can feel comfortable with there, not feel like you have to chip guys all the time. I know he's going to be ready to go in the run game. Might be a little time with pass pro, but I think that late in the first round especially, and look for the Bears, look for the Baltimore Ravens. Those are two teams that I say, hey, they might have him pretty high on their boards.
Well, a couple of follow-ups on your comments. One was general managers and scouts love the guys they know. They trust them. They know what they're going to get. There's less risk there. Two, when you were talking about helping a tackle, it brought me back to when we were talking about Kwity Paye, and you said the lack of defensive talent isn't necessarily there, and he didn't necessarily show up in the big games. Well, shoot, I can chip him with a tight end and a running back. I can take a defensive end if he's by himself. I can take him out of a game. So all these things are starting to come together for me for Michigan football, thanks to Sam Webb, the MichiganInsider.com. Let's go one more, a couple more, but the next one I want to talk about is Nico Collins.
Mm-hmm.
I got to see Nico Collins down at the Senior Bowl, and he's got size, he's got speed, he's got body control. You see his numbers there on the banner. It's a 6.71, 4.43 40 is good. Everybody seems to be running 4.4s these days. But you can't fake the shuttle, L cone, broad jump, vertical. You can't fake those. Those are the athlete numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, he wasn't used a ton at Michigan. And after a nice opening day or so at Senior Bowl, when they'd go live, he was nowhere to be found. So what's up with Nico Collins in game day? Where's Nico Collins when it matters?
So first of all, it's great that you're putting his shuttle time up. It was the thing that stuck out to me most about him coming in is that a guy that long, he wasn't 215 at the time. He was maybe 190 or something like that. but a guy that long, that was that fluid, that could
change directions like that.
His hips and change directions
Mm-hmm.
like that. You could see that as a high schooler. It's like, man, this, he moves around like, not like he's 6'4", like he's, 6 foot, 5'11".
5'10" cornerbacks run 6'7" L cones.
Yeah, the way that he can sink his hips, change directions, explode out of breaks. Now, as he got bigger, was it quite as explosive? Maybe he lost a little bit, but still, for his size, for 6'4", 215 and 6'7", is still freaky. It's like, man, that's pretty good. So what happened? Why didn't it always show up in big numbers on game days like you see for some other wideouts in this draft? Couple of factors. Number one, you got a situation where Nico Collins wasn't the only receiver that came in that heralded class. He was, I feel like, a little overlooked in a class with 2 All-Americans. One, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who you saw his talent. He burst onto the scene over there with the Cleveland Browns last year. Tariq Black, another All-American, came in, more highly regarded than Nico. He has since transferred to Texas. Is going to go on to the NFL now. So you were spreading the wealth. You were spreading the ball around. I think that was a factor. And then look, man, Michigan's going to run the football more than some of these other teams in this day and age, right? They aren't going to toss it around the yard 50 times a game. And so those few factors, I think, are part of the recipe to depress the numbers a little bit. But within that, you can make the argument that Michigan didn't go to him enough.
Okay. So the question I have here is, the phrase I've used in scouting forever, and someone on a trademark it is, they say you can't measure someone's heart. That's true, but I've added on to that, and I say, but you can damn sure tell if he's got one or not. Mm-hmm. So you're the numbers and stuff. You don't feel that there's any question about his competitiveness and his drive, because to me, if you've got competitive nature and a 6'4", 215-pound guy running 4 threes that moves like a cornerback, you put him on the team. He's a take.
No, he competes, and you see it. And I look at the Ohio State game. He was one of the only guys. I know they've gotten blown out by Ohio State the last couple of times they played, but I go back to the one down there in Columbus back in 2018, and it's like, okay, this guy, he's still fighting. He's still competing. And he's like, man, they can't guard me. Michigan just couldn't protect well. And that's another thing. They couldn't protect well enough across the line to really keep him clean enough to get some of those downfield routes that would really take advantage of a vertical guy.
Well, Sam, when we're building a team and I talk about defensive end or corner, I say the best corner in the world is a quarterback on his ass. Yeah, so, I'm going to make my secondary look great with this quarterback running for his life.
Yeah.
So, okay, good, because the body control is there, the hands are there, the athleticism's there. It depends on how much someone falls in love with him, because he's got physical traits of a top 15 guy, let alone someone that's going to be in the 3rd or 4th round, for goodness sake.
Yeah, of the guys that we've talked about so far, I think Nico is the surest thing.
Okay.
He's the guy that I think you should be the most confident in value, that you're going to get the return on that pick investment wherever you pick him. I think
I'm going to turn that short clip into a promo. I'm going to turn that short clip from Sam into a promo, and then you can. I'll let you as you click on it.
Of the guys we mentioned thus far, because there's a guy that we haven't talked about yet. That if you ask me when we talk next year, and you say, Sam, who is that guy who that was in the class that you said, you look back, you say, man, he wound up having the biggest impact or the best career.
Well, I'm gonna open that up. I'm gonna give you a wild card in a second. But the last of the guys I want to talk about real quick is Cameron McGrone, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Right. Injury. He a 6-foot linebacker with a wingspan like a pterodactyl. Mm-hmm. And how is he doing recovering from injury, and what can we expect from him on the next level?
Yeah, I think everything I hear say he's progressing fine, and he has history recovering from. He had an ACL injury in high school between his junior and senior year, and I want to say it was it November that he injured he tore his ACL. I think November or so of his junior year. By March, Scott, April. He was back running again. He was at one of those Nike opening combines and turning in a 4.6 by the spring. And then we saw him in the opening later that year. He was running around like he hadn't been injured. So a guy who knows what the rehab is all about, has rehabbed in the past successfully. When you watch him in games, he has that suddenness that you can't teach. Mm-hmm. He is a see ball, get ball guy. And
I always say anticipation's worth 0.3 of a second on a 40 time.
Yeah. And so for me, where he showed up the most is as a blitzer. You know how you can send guys on blitzes, and you can send anyone on a blitz, but who gets there? Cam is a guy that has a knack as a blitzer. Now, I think that his stock was harmed by the fact that they didn't play him a lot. I feel like Cam McGrone, because of his athleticism, his athletic traits, he should have been playing earlier. That he should have been getting some snaps, not as a starter, but as a backup. I mean, you got guys like Devin Bush out there. He's not going to play over a Devin Bush, but in a backup role, maybe lining up next to Devin Bush at times to further his development. By the time he gets on the field in 19 versus Wisconsin, he came in because there was an injury, right? I mean, he just, his development was stunted by the lack of usage. And I don't think it was a talent thing as much as it was they were more comfortable with veteran guys that weren't as good athletically. And so this is a real projection, because while athletically he could play in the NFL right now, there's going to be a learning curve for him in NFL defenses. Michigan, especially in coverage. I mean, Michigan, they were a man-to-man team, but in zone, they were very basic. They were a cover 2 team and without much variation, a cover 2 spot drop team. So he's going to have to learn some of the zone concepts and to get comfortable in zone defenses. And that's going to take some time. It's going to take some time at the NFL. It's going to take some more training. So this is more of a projection pick, but you can't go wrong with this kind of athleticism. A coach who believes in his ability to develop is going to love the Cam McGrone pick.
Well, I'm a big fan of the KISS philosophy. Keep it simple, stupid. When I start hearing about these coordinators and their, playbooks that are this thick, I just roll my eyes. I'm like, yeah, you're not long for this game. So I told you I was going to give you a wild card. Who's the guy?
Ambry Thomas.
Who's this?
Ambry Thomas. Look at his pro day numbers. I think it was 4.37 40, 38-inch vertical. This is a kid who is just scratching the surface of what he's going to be. And when he did play in his junior year, his first and only year as a starter, you saw him really flash, and you're like, man, this dude. And it was rendered more impressive if you understand the background heading into that season. That summer between his sophomore and junior years, he had a bout with colitis. They didn't know what it was at the time, but he was hospitalized for weeks. His weight dropped to about 150 pounds. They didn't think that he was going to be ready to go for the start of the season. They thought it was going to be Big Ten play before Ambry Thomas was back. But here he is running stairs in the hospital, getting his weight back up. By the time fall camp rolls around, he's back up to 175, 180. By the time the season rolls around, he's 190 and starting for Michigan in game 1. So it tells you something about his drive, his commitment, and his sheer athleticism. So he pairs that mentality that I love to see in football. I like edge, man, and he brings that to the table, but he pairs it with outstanding athleticism. So he's a guy that you could put on the outside. He had to learn to be more physical because he could always run. I think he's done that as he's gotten bigger. You can put him over the slot. If you want him to play nickel in the NFL, he can do that. He didn't do it much or any at Michigan because Don Brown was so concerned about teams running the football. He always wanted a safety at nickel. But in the NFL, where it's more about coverage, oh man, he can absolutely do that. Yeah. So he has the prototypical size, Scott. He has the mentality. And he spent the year working on his body even more. He's a guy that I think his best football is without question ahead of him. And I would not be at all surprised if a few years down the line, we look back at this draft and we say, Ambry Thomas was the best guy to come out in this Michigan class.
Well, that's a bold statement, and yes, the NFL is a passing league, without a doubt. Being down here in the South, going to an SEC school, I was always about defense. You put your best athletes on defense, but shoot, now you're not allowed to tackle, you're not allowed to cover, you're not allowed to hit the quarterback. I'm like, why would anybody play defense? So if you can find somebody with that mentality, and what did we say just a few minutes ago? You can't measure their heart, but you can damn sure tell if they've got one. Ambry Thomas sounds like he fits the bill.
Absolutely.
So, and let me do a call here. Ben Rolfe, Pro Football Network, has 3 months ago Ambry Thomas in the first round to the Green Bay Packers.
Wow.
Everybody else is about 4 or 5 in their mock drafts, but let's see how Ben Rolfe, that might be his calling card not too long from now.
Yeah, I don't know that he, I think they wanted to maybe see him, a year removed from that colitis.
Yeah, and you don't even have, if you're Ben, you don't say, listen, you can say, listen, they took him in the 5th, but he ended up being a first-round talent. I win.
Yeah, he's a steal in the 5th round. Second, third round, I think you're right there in the value department. Okay. If you get him in the 5th, you are a steal, and you're killing the game if you get Ambry Thomas in the 5th round, in my opinion.
Well, let's before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about Jim Harbaugh and Michigan football 2021 season. Now, one of my favorite quotes was from Bull Durham when he's talking about you got shower on your fungus on your shower shoes. He says, when you're until you win 20 in the show, you're a slob. When you win 20 in the show, the press is going to think you're colorful. Jim Harbaugh, he's a little different. He was charming and everything. Now it seems like that's worn off a little bit, because he's not winning at the level that Michigan football is accustomed to. A 2-4 season. Did COVID save him? Because this was kind of a blank, a pass for everybody. And Sam, I asked the same question about James Franklin to Mark Brennan, because they underachieved for Penn State football as well. Is Jim Harbaugh, how hot is his seat right now?
I think that first, when you talk about where they were last season, much like Penn State with Micah Parsons opting out, Michigan was hit even harder when Nico Collins opted out, Jalen Mayfield opted out, Ambry Thomas opted out. These guys that we were talking about in this draft, all those guys didn't play a snap. Jalen Mayfield played, a couple of games and was out the rest of the season. Kwity Paye didn't play the full season. So, Michigan was hit by COVID harder than a lot of teams. I think that factored into the postseason assessment by the AD Ward Manual. At the same time, there definitely were some shortcomings that were that weren't a reflection of a COVID issue, and you saw a lot of staff changes that I think addressed that. You had some things that you had to change around defensively. For me, I think a big part of it was recruiting. I think that the defense that Don Brown inherited wasn't replenished with the same caliber of talent. I mean, you look back at that defense in 2016, Jordan Lewis and Taco Charlton and Chris Wormley and DeMonte Thomas and Delano Hill and all these guys are pros. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just didn't that level of talent wasn't refilled, wasn't replenished with guys who were as good. And
so you 5 or 6 NFL guys on a single defense makes the defense pretty salty.
Yeah, and so that whole defense, sans the defensive line coach, was replaced, and they were replaced with so the defensive coordinator Mike McDonald comes from the NFL. That's number one. So you're getting some NFL influence in the defensive scheme, but it's really, really young. Really young. I think you got some guys who bring some recruiting prowess to the table. I think the marriage of those two things, I think you can really see Jim Harbaugh seeing the need to address that. Connecting with his guys even more. I think that's another thing that the youth, because you saw even on the offensive staff, them get younger as well. A new offensive line coach in Sharon Moore. You bring Mike Hart back, right? I mean, you addressed some issues recruiting, which I think was the biggest one. You get some guys with reputations for developing from the NFL. You try to piece them together and hope that bridges some of the gaps that you've seen emerge, both in recruiting and in development here over the last few years, because you asked it to answer your question more succinctly. How hot is this seat? It's warm.
Mm-hmm.
And you could hear that in the answer to he was at a coach's clinic, or a virtual coach's clinic. He said one of the things that he vowed not to do is make decisions out of fear of losing his job. And you don't make a statement like that unless you know that's a possibility, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, knowing that it's always a possibility in big time football.
Right, exactly. But it's more top of mind that,
Sure.
hey, you know what? There is more intense scrutiny on progress. I don't know what the measure is.
And that's what I want to ask you, Sam. Before you say I don't know, I'm going to put you on the spot, because the schedule sets up fairly friendly next year. We're talking Western Michigan, Washington is an interesting matchup. Northern Illinois, Rutgers, and then it starts getting a little crazy in there. At Wisconsin, at Nebraska, Northwestern, at Michigan State. What's it going to take for what kind of record are we looking at next year for Jim Harbaugh to be safe? And what would you consider progress?
So, to me, what is the record going to be? I got to hear some more about how things are coming as far as this defense is concerned. It's just so much new scheme, new coaches, marrying a scheme between a coordinator and a co-coordinator. I don't know what that's going to look like.
I hate that word. I hate that. I hate that co-word. I hate it.
I don't know what that's going to look like. But so what's progress? I mean, you can't lose to a team like they lost to Michigan State last year, for instance, and that a terrible Michigan State team. Now, Michigan wound up being not very good too. So, right. So it's all relative, but to be better, to get back on the track that you were, let's be clear. When you said get Michigan to winning to the level they're accustomed to winning. When Jim Harbaugh got here, he inherited a 5-win team.
Yeah.
So, they hadn't been a team winning double-digit games for a little while there before Brady Hoke, his first year, won 11 games, and then it went downhill pretty steeply. They weren't winning double-digit games consistently. Jim Harbaugh comes in and wins 10 games 3 times. He was, a yard away from beating Ohio State in 16. A backup quarterback who can complete a forward pass away from beating Ohio State in 17. And then it's gone down since. So how quickly can you get back on track to beating the rest of the Big Ten? Number one, because he's beaten everyone else in the Big Ten. Can he get back on that track this year? And then at least be competitive with Ohio State. The last couple of years, they weren't even competitive with Ohio State past the first half in 19. So those are measures that I think you look to. What does that equate to as far as the overall record is concerned? I don't know that there's a number on it. I just know that, Michigan State, that was one that I think was really, really kind of turned the tide last year. So that would be one that I look at, beating that rival in a situation that looks like it's worse than yours is a big key. And then just, winning the games you should win, being more competitive in the games that are with teams that are more similar to you. Can't get run off the field by Wisconsin, can't get run off the field by Ohio State.
Well, and my measure has always been, but I've never had a team like Michigan to root for in my life. I'm an Atlanta fan, for goodness sakes, but my measure for myself, for my children, for the teams I coach is just always get better. Just get better. Right. Show that you're on the right track, and things will be okay.
That's exactly right. I mean, again, what is that number-wise? I don't know what that equates to.
It's a feeling. When you're getting better. You know it. And so do recruits, and I love the cutthroat nature.
So do ADs.
So, well, Sam, I want to thank you for joining us today, and then the people watching. We didn't get a ton of comments yet, but so I want y'all to hit the comments on whether you're watching it on Facebook or YouTube, and I'll make sure to answer, and I'll find Sam otherwise. But you can find Sam at SamWebb77 and at themichiganinsider.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. Sam, it's always a pleasure. I can't wait to do this again, and I'm looking forward to digging this out in a couple of years with Ambry Thomas
There you go.
and Sam gassing up Ambry Thomas. I can say,
Bree, don't let me down, man.
I'm like, this is why we go to Sam Webb, is for this type of insight 3 years later. And you should have taken him before the 6th round, folks. So, again, thanks again, and look forward to doing this again soon.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
So that was Sam Webb. We talked NFL draft and the Michigan insider Sam Webb. And we talked some Kwity Paye. We talked all of those NFL prospects. We got a sleeper alert. Make sure you're watching Ambry Thomas. If you're watching, leave a comment. I'll come back and answer them. And please hit that subscribe button. It helps out me. It helps out guys like Sam. It helps make this little video cast that we're doing bigger and better. And we need your help. So thanks again, and we'll see you again on Friday.